Madam World President, board members, executive director, delegates, members and guests. Before I begin, I would like to thank the conference and specifically Mrs. Hines for her and your expression of confidence in my colleagues and I this morning. It really is appreciated. Additionally, I would like to say that between items this morning, I've uploaded the videos that have been shown during the conference, and these are now all on the website, apart from the ones we've just shown, which will be up shortly. So do go to the conference page on the website if you'd like to see them, and eventually we'll move them over to the resources section. And a further note is that the members joining online are very much enjoying the opportunity to see familiar faces and follow the conference, so a definite seconding of the World President's suggestion of doing it all again. I joined ACWW in January 2016, and since then I've had the opportunity to get to know many of our members worldwide. In doing my work, I act on behalf of all of you and them, the ACWW membership, and our members' UN Advocacy Committee. I am hired to work for all of you and them to do work on the ground on a day-to-day basis to enhance the impact of our members, and it's my hope that I have served you well in doing this. When preparing this verbal update to my full written report, which is in the Triennial Report of Work beginning on page 44, I tried to draw upon three key examples of our advocacy work that I could focus in on. One comes from July 2019, the second from 2021, and the last just a couple of months ago. In July 2019, around 40 governments were examined on their progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. In preparation for the high-level political forum on sustainable development, I spent a lot of time working with ACWW members in Lesotho and Cameroon, listening to those members, detailing the positives and negatives of the reality that they live. From the new but already positive National Strategic Development Plan 2 in Lesotho, and its specific language on women in rural communities being added for the first time, to the massacres of unarmed civilians by government-backed forces in Cameroon in an undeclared civil war based along colonial background. Assisting ACWW members in drafting their statements, which were delivered at the UN in front of not only their own governments, but the policymakers and those who decide how things change from 192 other countries was a significant and inspiring experience. When we look at that number, we of course include the many small island and small island developing states that we get to engage with. And I'm sure that Gail would agree that these states hold a crucial importance on a par with New Zealand and Australia. And of course, our current hosts in Southeast Asia and the Far East would recognize their area as having bigger and smaller countries. So I guess you could say that all our areas are unique. I've also requested to serve our members more directly. The New Zealand government was due to give its update and voluntary national review on the Sustainable Development Goals, and I had a call from the headquarters of Rural Women New Zealand. There was the opportunity to give a 3-minute direct response to the New Zealand government, and I was asked to deliver that statement as I was at the UN. Working with the then national president and her team, luckily with time zones most of the way through the night but early morning for them, we drafted a text which I delivered the next morning, having spent about an hour practicing so I didn't ruin the greeting in Te Reo Maori. Tēnā koutou. The critical focus of the statement was the reduction in the number of rural midwives and the removal of funding for facilities, resulting in hundreds of deaths at the roadside of women in labour in the 2 years previous, trying to reach healthcare. After the statement was delivered, I met with the New Zealand ambassador to the UN, and he committed to his team following up with Rural Women New Zealand. And 2 weeks later, I heard from Fiona Gower to say that they had been in touch and had set a meeting to address concerns locally. I am so pleased that the National President of Rural Women New Zealand, Jill Naylor, is here this week, and to report that we have just completed our 5th successful year of collaboration at the Commission on the Status of Women with Jill and her colleagues. Looking right at the end of this triennium, the last major piece of advocacy work completed just before this conference. We've mentioned the Commission on the Status of Women, and each year this gathers to seek to establish new standards for the rights of women globally and set goals and a pathway for action. Small steps in this international forum can have a much larger impact in the real world. We've seen, in fact, with the UN report delivered by Mrs. Kenny a couple of days ago, Margaret Broom from Northern Ireland saying, "I had the opportunity to sit with the British ambassador to the UN and explain the needs and the problems facing our rural women in Northern Ireland." And that is what we do. For the last 5 years, I've advised the UK government when they prepare for negotiations for CSW, working with the negotiators during the Commission to bring forward the voices of our members in the UK specifically there, and our members around the world. The UK takes a global perspective, and they are keen to engage with positive change, at least in that forum. There are hundreds of people all contributing towards one goal, that one outcome document of the Commission called the Agreed Conclusions. In 2018, rural women were the priority theme, and this year, that theme was reviewed for updates. When the Zero draft, the very first version of that conclusion document, was released, I was delighted to find a paragraph that I had drafted with members from ACWW in Canada, Cameroon, Eswatini, Lesotho, New Zealand, and the UK in 2018, was now being included in the draft that had become agreed language at the United Nations because of our members. Advocacy work isn't always fast. It can be painfully slow and painfully nuanced. A comma here, a word there, changing the entire meaning of a sentence, the entire meaning of a law, the entire right to exist. The biggest honor of my 7 years service at ACWW was facilitating a meeting held at the UN recently, just 2 months ago, or as someone pointed out to me, 6 weeks ago, where we were able to bring 2 of our grassroots members to the table, opening a door to the international community and giving the floor to those members. Tagra Guganerdin from St. Tooth Development Bridge NGO in Mongolia, and Judith Juma from the Social Justice League spoke so powerfully on the realities of their lives and their work and their rural communities that an Australian government official who had attended the meeting then asked if she could join ACWW. These members, one of whom is in the hall this morning, we've seen Judy offering her expertise to us this morning, were rightly recognised as equals in a meeting with a Canadian minister and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island Commissioner from Australia. Bringing the voices of our members to this table, think of the UN not as a government, but rather a family dining table where there's inevitable squabbles erupting all over the place. Bringing the voices of our members into that space, either in person or through their reports, their quotes, their activities, their Zoom calls, their videos, their music, their culture, their heritage, is what motivates me every single morning. Our project participants all over the world bring such a depth of experience and perspective to our work, and we could not do advocacy work without their input. This is why the new projects are so critical, because rather than keeping a distant hand or a distant eye, we will actually be engaging with our project's participants and ensuring that their voices are heard. At the same time, when we see the same types of projects over and over and over again in the same countries, the same villages, the same communities, we have to have advocacy work at the local, national and international level to encourage a change in policy, a change in society, a change in political approach and the reality for those women. Or we are just sticking another plaster, a band-aid, some kind of self-adhesive bandage of your choice, depending on where you're from, on that wound, and we will never see meaningful change. We learn from our members every day, and my job is to ensure that those lessons are passed on helping lighten the burden from our volunteer grassroots members to educate those who make decisions that affect their lives, that decide their access to their rights, and help ensure that documents and processes like the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and Rural Workers, the International Decade of Indigenous Languages, UNESCO's Forum on Tackling Racism, or the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples are not just printed paper in meetings, but pathways to a stronger, safer, and more equitable future for all of us. Thank you for the opportunity to serve you for these past 7 years, and in particular this triennium. Thank you.